Hello and welcome. I'm George Crump, lead analyst with Storage Switzerland. Thank you for joining us today. Today we're going to be talking about 3 steps to modernizing backup storage. A lot has changed in the data center. We're modernizing everything else, and sometimes the backup infrastructure gets sort of forgotten about. So joining me to help with that conversation, I've invited Amit Rolani, Director of Technology Alliances with Cloudian, and Rick Vanover, Director of Product Strategy at Veeam. Amit, let's start with you first before we get into the presentation. Why don't you give the folks a little background on yourself and on Cloudian?
Sure. Thanks, George. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here. I am Amit Rolani, Director of Technology Alliances and Solutions Marketing here at Cloudian. I've been in the industry for over 20 years, having been and seen various infrastructure roles from networking to storage. I've also dabbled in analytics, and I've been with Cloudian for a little over a year now, heading their alliances for data protection and some other verticals around that. So Cloudian, as some of you might be aware of, is an object storage company. It's about 7-year-old, and it's a well-funded startup with having closed over $95 million over the last 6 months. We are growing rapidly and doing pretty well in the storage space. That's a quick introduction for myself and the company.
Thank you, Amit. Yeah, I just did a write-up on your guys' 2018 results. They were very impressive. Rick, equally impressive is Veeam's numbers and what's going on over there. So why don't you give the folks that don't know you and Veeam a quick background on yourself and the company?
Hey, thanks again, George and Amit. Welcome all the listeners. Veeam has a backup product that I think is, changing the game every time we come up with an update. And my role is just to really evangelize and bring those capabilities to market. Veeam's been in business since 2006, and hopefully, we can have a great story about taking modern approaches to backup data storage here today.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. Yeah, in fact, to a large degree, I had to give credit where credit is due. It was your guys' update that really triggered some of our thought processes around this. So for those who don't know me, I'm George Crump, founder and lead analyst at Storage Switzerland. We've been doing that for going on 13 years now. And prior to that, I was a CTO at a large storage integrator doing backup and disaster recovery designs for data centers across the United States. So guys, let's start here, and Rick, I'll probably kind of bring you in here mostly, but let's talk about what's changing in backup software, right? What's amazed me is how good backup software really is, and I don't mean to sound that like I should be surprised by that, but it is interesting because the things we used to count on other services for, backup can really do well now. Like we can get very quick, almost replication-like backups. We can get the feature you guys call instant recovery. We often refer to it as boot from backup, but the ability to recover sort of in place. I mean, those things, and then replication is sort of the process itself is becoming commonplace in software. I mean, these are fundamentally, you use the word game changer. These are fundamentally game changer from the backup software approach, aren't they?
Well, it is a game changer, and I think it's come about by a lot of changes in the data center and the cloud. If you look at what you can do with the virtual machine, what you can do in the cloud, you can click, spin up a workload in just minutes. Why do we have to wait hours for data to be recovered, right? So the expectation has actually been set from the production data. And, call it digital dependence, digital transformation, that, the IT services matter a lot more now. And because of that, there's an expectation that the restore experience matches that of production. So, yeah, it all's fallen into place at the right time, if you ask me.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think what's interesting is we talk about, we've got it sort of in the tomorrow section there, but it's really kind of the now section, is backup is also getting really good at long-term data retention. And I think that's something that people tend to overlook, is the importance and quality of the backup tracking mechanism, the database, if you will, or metadata that tracks all the information that's stored. I know that you guys have spent a lot of work here making sure that you guys can scale your environment. Talk a little bit about what you see as far as the needs to be able to scale backup from a software perspective.
Well, the needs are really about scaling around data explosive growth. And, the only practical way we see that at Veeam is the cloud to do that.
Yeah, and also I think that brings the second point. I think this was something that really came out in your guys' latest update, was the concept of being able to almost do tiering within the backup so that we have, I think it's practical now to have, say, a small flash device for immediate recoveries and then object storage / cloud storage for that long-term retention mechanism. Would you agree with that?
Well, I would agree with that. And, I purposely set the trap word of the cloud in there because that doesn't necessarily mean a hyperscale or whatever. What I think matters most is there's a model of scale and consumption that comes with this cloud approach. And, having the tiers of, it's a data management principle simply. But if I have my backup data here for this use case, the most frequent restore points, et cetera, but we're also in a situation where we're really wanting very, very long-term retention. And one of the only ways you can do that, on scale is the cloud model, right? So again, it's a right time to come in with a storage management policy of sorts that leverages the cloud, which can have, really no barriers around capacity due to its model. And it can match this expectation of retention that can really allow organizations to kind of confidently go forth and retain as much as they need to meet those business demands, whether it's 7 years, whether it's forever, whether it's undetermined. And, sometimes organizations can't even decide on how long they need to keep data. So then IT people are kind of caught in the crossfires there, and they're not going to delete anything. So you need a framework. You need a platform. You need a capacity-friendly and capacity-rich model that will allow you to tier your backup data to kind of meet those expectations.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think another point, that last bullet there, it's not necessarily directly tied with today's conversation, but I think it's an important change that we're seeing in backup software is this concept of being able to do either a staged or somewhat organized recovery to meet data privacy regulations like GDPR and things like that. I think the requirement to make sure that when you do a restore, that you don't restore somebody that was supposed to be forgotten. I think those sort of kind of future thinking capabilities are going to become increasingly important. What are your thoughts there?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it does feel a little bit common sense, but when we look at having those capabilities around the data, we're just going to need to manage it in a way that we can walk in to any requirement and meet those expectations.
Yeah, and I think even beyond data privacy, things with like cyber attacks and things like that, I think doing a secondary scan of data as it's coming in or right after it comes in, I think is going to be increasingly important. So let's talk a little bit about the impact of this software on the backup hardware. And what we've started to really talk to a lot of CIOs and VPs of IT about is this concept of really tiering your backup storage. And I admit, I think I've come a little ways because when I used to suggest that people use flash in their backup storage infrastructure, I think people used to like throw things at me, and they don't anymore. So that feels good. They might look at me with a funny stare, but they don't throw stuff immediately at me. But I think that to get that to work, we need something else, and that something else is a very high capacity, still good performance, but not obviously flash performance, something that really is ideal for long-term data retention. And that's where this sort of concept of cloud storage and object storage really starts to come into play, correct?
Right. And, this concept by itself is not new, right? Tiered storage concept has been there in the primary space for a while. It's just the concept being applied to the backup realm is what's coming to the fore right now. I mean, the reasons for that are sort of embedded in the KPIs, where you talk about the RPOs and the RTOs. Now, wherever you need to quickly recover your data, the more frequently accessed recovery points, you want those to be in a stage where it can be recovered in a matter of minutes or even lesser. And then there is the whole point of RPO, where you want to be able to store or backup data on a more regular basis and have more recovery points as you go. So that's going to increase the size of your backup storage that you need. And that's where you need something that's more inexpensive than, let's say, a flash grade small recovery point that you have in the storage space. And object storage is kind of object and cloud storage is kind of ideal for that, right? We're talking about an always online storage where you can have a massive amount of scalability without really incurring the cost of the high performance storage, which is not really required just for scale.
Yeah, I agree with that. And Rick, I think the combination here, I think that the software once again really enables this, because with the capability to sort of tier, if you will, or at least manage backup data, I can keep that flash area relatively small. I mean, I don't remember what the last study I saw on it, but the overwhelming number of recoveries comes from the last known good copy or last known good backup, which typically is, the last one you ran. I was actually speaking to an audience the other day, and I said, look, when I've been involved in helping customers recover from a disaster, the request to have data that's 6 months old never comes up. It's always, give me that database as it looked like right before we went down, right? And so that school of thought, I think, still pertains today, right? That most of your recoveries are going to come from the last known good backup, right?
Well, it depends on the why. Why is data being restored? If it's
good
like,
point.
User error, administrative error, system failure, absolutely. It's going to want to go from that most recent restore point, which brings up another problem, right? That there's this race to zero of kind of, last night might not be good enough, right? Sometimes we talk about having it, every 2 hours or every hour, 15 minutes even,
right.
Believe it or not. So that's one situation. But, if then you look at some of the threats of today, ransomware that sits idle. Okay. Now there is a diminishing value of data that is older, right? But the thought is, whether it's retention for compliance reasons, whether it's walking out of a ransomware situation that was incubating for a while, and then you can do some funny stuff where you might restore the system volume from 3 months ago and then put back the data volumes from last night, right? In fact, at Veeam, we have a tech support team that walks customers through some of those things, right? They've got a special type of support experience, because ransomware is not just a PC problem. It absolutely is a data center problem as well. And then other, things that can drive that retention longer are things like that requirement for retention, compliance, Derek call it infighting within the different business groups, and et cetera. But you almost want to have the same type of capabilities, whatever the requirements are. So high-speed recovery, having all of the data you need. Those are, whether it's, 1 week or 1 year or more, you really can't say no to any of the capabilities.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I'm going is that the time pressure changes, right? If it's a compliance situation, you're looking at you still can't take 6 months to recover the data, right? But if your disaster recovery requirement is 15 minutes, to use your example, and probably responding to a legal discovery request, you probably got hours, if not days, to respond to that request, right? And so the need for flash there is greatly diminished, right?
Oh, indeed. And the other side of it can be, maybe it's an analytics use case, and that situation is, the pressure's off. Like, let me take the data that we had in December of 2017, and if we would have done this market move that we did last year, put it back there, how would it go? And I want to model all of that, not in production, right? Sometimes throwing that up in a restored environment, test environment, Veeam can do that kind of stuff too. That can actually be pretty helpful as well. And the kind of the urgency is usually off in those situations.
Yeah, exactly. So, let's talk a little bit about sort of some of the options here for this second tier. I think sometimes for lack of a better word, maybe the knee-jerk reaction is just to buy some big old high-capacity NAS, or to dump everything to the cloud in the cloud sense of the word, like public cloud. And I think that the advantages that object storage has here is generally speaking, in my experience anyways, it's more cost effective than the typical NAS, because generally the NAS was designed to do other things. And then the way I just explain it with the cloud is the cloud is really good at temporal things. It's not so good at long-term things from a price perspective. I mean, they could certainly store data long-term. I don't mean to say that, but that periodic, that first month you paid for that petabyte, that was really pretty cool. The 36 month you paid for that petabyte, the same price over and over and over again for 36 months, gets a little annoying, right? And then we've also got the whole egress fee issue, which I still can't believe they still charge us for. What are your thoughts in those areas?
So you hit all the points in there, right? So there is definitely situations where we see customers trying to use NAS as a long-term backup solution. Now, there are certain reasons why it doesn't work, specifically from the scalability perspective, right? So NAS is a hierarchical system based on file systems, and we know that on that perspective, if you have a hierarchical namespace, there are certain specific limitations to how much you can scale on a per rack perspective, right? And as you start creating backups that are in the multi-petabytes, which is a lot of our customers these days, you're getting into situations where you get NAS sprawls, and it's very unwieldy to manage. It doesn't really scale well. And of course, it's NAS. It's designed to do, in certain cases, high-performance operations, and it's not the most cost-effective way to get a long-term, highly scalable kind of a backup system. Now, most of our customers are really going more and more to high capacity in the backup. As Rick mentioned, this is for multiple reasons, ranging from regulatory compliance or actually being able to use their data across multiple years to run analytic workloads in the backup. You may not want to do this in production, but in backup, it completely makes sense to have a restore point to try and model certain things in certain scenarios. And that's where, having a scalable object storage system, which kind of keeps the cost under check while giving you that scalability, is much better than a NAS system. And then from a cloud perspective, yes, cloud is extremely flexible and extremely scalable, but cloud is built on standard object S3 kind of technology. And that's what we are saying. It makes more sense to have this on premises because, one, you hit the cost terms, right? There is the ingress and egress fees associated with cloud. And if you really want to do anything with the data that's stored in the cloud, you're going to incur those fees. On top of that, a lot of the cloud vendors also have API access charges, which quickly start bubbling up as you start doing something with the data under retention. And then finally, having a cloud-like setup with the same kind of flexibility and same kind of scalability, but at almost a lower cost point once you start scaling to a certain point, and under the security and control of your own data center and firewalls is what most of our customers are coming to us for. And that's where, Cloudian with our solutions associated with Veeam is kind of shining.
Yeah, in retrospect, I look at it now and I wish I would have specialized in translating cloud storage bills for customers, because they're like really hard to figure out. But let's talk about one other area that we see in the kind of the, especially in the legacy backup architecture space, which I use the term legacy, but I would say that 90% of them have this type of a situation, some sort of a dedicated backup appliance or backup disk type of target. And the problem with those is they're single-purpose devices in most cases.
Right.
You can't, and I think one of the real values of object storage that I keep coming back to when we talk to customers about it is object storage is so darn flexible. You can do so much with it. I mean, I know customers in the HPC environment that are even using it in what I would call like semi-production workloads, right? Because of the requirements are such that it works. And it can do archive storage. It can, in some levels, be a NAS replacement. And in some applications, if they're native S3, it can actually use it as their primary storage tier. So that flexibility is also a key thing, because you're not buying it just for backup, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the workloads that our customers are running on Hyperstore, Cloudian Hyperstore, range from the standard data protection workloads, but we also have active archive kind of workloads being used, where you have a data lake created along with object store being that capacity layer, but it's active. So your applications are directly using S3 calls, whether it's in a Hadoop system or it's on your traditional storage system. You're capable of accessing the data that's sitting in an object store directly from your primary systems. In the object storage technology, each object is associated with custom metadata. That also opens up new and interesting use cases for data that's under archive. Previously, if you're talking about archives, you're talking about backups. That data is just is in a black box. You cannot do anything till you are starting to look into it. But with metadata being associated with an always online storage like object stores, you're now capable of searching through huge troves of archives and running workloads which were just not possible before. I mean, we have very interesting use cases also in the media space, where you have, because of the metadata, you have now all of the media files that can be searched through, and with interesting AI and machine learning kind of tricks, you can embed intelligence into the data stored in object storage. So yes, the use cases are definitely a lot more than just data protection, and object storage in many instances can be used as a mix of primary / archive kind of storage.
Yeah, exactly. So I think what we're trying to get across here, I wanted to do this fairly quickly, is really look at there's two things. I think the big change, if you will, is backup software now is creating an environment that you can tier storage. And I think, as Amit said earlier, tier storage is nothing new, but I think one of the places it can be best implemented is backup, because you have this sort of single controlling entity that can manage it very well. And that's generally what makes tiered storage difficult, is who controls it. Well, in backup, we already know who's going to control it. So as your backup software supports it, really puts you in a good position to leverage it. And then if you look at either a small flash tier or even a small high-performance hard disk tier, and then something like object storage to keep that tier small, the cost parameters start to really make sense as well. So obviously, I was really excited to have Veeam on the line, because I think you guys are really kind of leading the pack in this area. So Rick, why don't you talk a little bit about what you guys are doing in this space, and we'll go from there.
So thanks again for that. And, the logic here is that it all starts with this backup stage, which is the gateway to these larger conversations around visibility, activating data, orchestrating data, and automating data. So, this is a kind of a policy view of how to use data, which matches explicitly how we want to go about and store data, right? And, the very first step is backing that data up. And we'll have visibility into it. We can use it, orchestrate around it, and automate around it. And as we go to the next slide, that mindset starts to get applied where we will see, I can do that. We'll see that, Veeam has a number of different products in the mix here, but they really are around orchestrating and monitoring the data that goes into these various different sources of data, whether it's in the cloud, software as a service, physical on-premises workloads, virtual machines, all those different data sources. Think of it like a funnel where we want to bring it into these stages of data management. And when we think about the actual way we get that done, a policy around the cloud across all these different data sources can walk us into a better way of more comprehensively managing it. And from the Veeam perspective, we look at it with APIs as a way to get this done. We have a data lab, which is that test engine to activate that data and do things with it. And of course, having the visibility along the way. And one of the new capabilities that really is a big deal is this Veeam Cloud tier. And it kind of matches to what we were talking about, having a high performance tier up front for just the most recent backups, and then, enjoy the potential of unlimited backups in this cloud tier. And we've actually very much expected that the on-prem use case would be very significant with the S3 compatible storage. And that it was one of the reasons why we very explicitly supported it broadly from the start. And the thought here is, you have the hyperscale options as well, but that egress part that George brought up can be significant. So having this conversation completely on premises, there's some benefits there as well. And how we actually do that is pretty interesting. So if we take a block of data here on the left, we've simplified it for view, but basically the Veeam backup file format is composed of metadata and then the actual data of the backup. And what we actually do is kind of decouple those. By decoupling those and leaving the metadata on premises or on that higher performance tier, and then in the capacity tier, and Cloudian is one of the supported targets for this, we can actually keep the depth of this data. And the beautiful thing here is that there's actually some built-in storage efficiencies. Now, this data reduction technique is not deduplication, but it's kind of similar. And what I mean by that is, if my metadata matches some blocks in this backup and that backup and the 13 backups after this, it's only going to store that once in the capacity tier of the S3 compatible storage. So by keeping that metadata with a very comprehensive map of where those what were blocks, which are now objects in the capacity tier sit, we can walk into some really smart data management to have a great target on something like Cloudian. And so, so tell me the other side of this, Amit, does it, from an S3 compatible standpoint, how do you guys kind of address that market?
Right. So thanks, Rick. That was a perfect segue into what we do at Cloudian, right? So Cloudian, our flagship product is called Hyperstore. So we are a completely compliant, S3 compliant object storage, and what we do is we have our S3 storage, which is available to our customer on premises inside their own data centers, right? We are able to start small and scale to hundreds of petabytes, and we have customers using us in excess of 200 petabytes in backup and archive tiers right now. We mentioned this a little while ago. Use cases with object storage today are not just limited to the data protection realm. So backup archive is our major use case, but we do have customers that use on-prem object storage in the media and entertainment industry for things like replacing their LTO tape backups, in surveillance to be the high scale out kind of video data storage system, and so on and so forth, right? But the key to this is that the native compatibility with S3, which is the protocol that Amazon came out with about 10 years ago, has enabled us to kind of take the scalability and access to the next level. it not just allows us to scale, but it's also compatible with all of the applications that have been created for the public cloud, and also gives us capability to do hybrid cloud use cases where you can have the most critical backups on your premises and to use the cloud flexibility and scalability for disaster recovery kind of situations. Let's go to the next slide. So what Hyperstore offers you is exabyte scalability. So we have been known to scale to hundreds of petabytes, but in theory, the technology has no limitations on scale because of the flat namespace. So it's just as easy as adding additional servers in a scale-out architecture to be able to scale even further on from the hundreds of petabytes that we already have. One of the things that Hyperstore gives you is integrated data protection. Now, what that means is every copy of data that's stored within Hyperstore has the capability of being stored in a replication manner. So we will have 3 copies of the data that are stored. Or you can choose erasure coding as a data protection mechanism within Hyperstore. This allows us to give our customers up to 14 nines of data durability for the data under storage at Cloudian. The system is a distributed system. We are able to do geo-distributed clusters so that there is data locality, and there is also the data resiliency that comes into play. And hybrid and multi-cloud because we support all of the public clouds with native integration for these. Coming to our solution with Veeam. So with the recent update 4, 9.5 update 4 release at Veeam, we have now native S3 integration to the Veeam availability suite, and we are capable of being the on-prem capacity tier for a Veeam backup environment, or we can also do a distributed offsite capacity storage tier for Veeam. Now, what this does is it almost completes your backup solution in a Veeam environment with a cost-effective on-premises cloud-like tier, which gives you enterprise-grade scalability at a very, very reasonable cost. In this scenario, as Rick mentioned, Veeam controls backup and recovery operation based on the policies that have been defined within the Veeam engine, and Hyperstore is the S3 target that can be directly utilized for capacity storage. Sorry, one more point that I wanted to make here was, and the recovery options that you have with the update 4 come in 2 fashions. So you can have a drip recovery, which is to rehydrate the primary storage based on your use case requirements. So if it's a high performance use case, you can do that, and we also support the recovery directly from the data under storage within the object store system. So very flexible solution, and we are working closely with Veeam and our joint customers to further evolve the support for this solution. And with that, I believe that's about it. Back to you, George.
All right, thank you, man. I appreciate that. Hey, I have one quick question. Hopefully I'm not going to get you in trouble, but I wanted to make sure I understood that last point. So I don't need to, even though it's tiered, if in the event of a recovery, if it's not on that faster backup storage tier, I can restore that directly from the Cloudian appliance into production storage with the Veeam solution. Did I understand that correctly?
That is correct. From what I understand is you can have complete restores of VMs that have been stored in Hyperstore being recovered directly from the capacity tier without necessarily going into the the primary tier, backup tier. And Rick can add to that if required.
Yeah, the magic there is that it's very resilient. Really, if the capacity tier, so the blue and the orange on the left, if that's all lost, the data on the right in Hyperstore is self-describing and self-contained. And, a quick import, maybe encryption password, you're good to go, and you can restore. So it's actually resilient just by the way it's implemented.
Fantastic. Okay. Let's see. So, guys, we've got a few questions in the queue, so why don't you go ahead and prioritize some of those so we can get to them. Before we get to the questions, though, just a couple of quick housekeeping items. Questions come up about, is the webinar available on demand? And the answer is yes. What's good about the way we do it is you use the same URL that you came to the live event, you use for the on-demand event. Usually the on-demand version is available about 5 minutes after we finish today's. So if you want to forward this to a colleague or a friend or whatever, by the way, we'd love you to do that. It should be ready by the time they get the email. Also, I wanted to direct your attention to the attachments section. There's all kinds of attachments in there on different things that are relevant to the conversation. And so feel free to take advantage of those when you can. I get questions sometimes on what is the storage report. So that is a weekly news, or a couple times a week newsletter that actually I do. It's kind of like, it's not really news, it's me ranting about the news. So if you want see me get in trouble, that's the place to do it. Let's see. And then the last thing is feedback. There's a section there as you leave the webinar after we're done with the questions and answers to rate the webinar. There's a star rating system, 5 stars being the best. So with that out of the way, guys, are you ready to answer a few of these questions?
Sure.
Fire away.
Okay. All right, let's see. Rick, why don't you go first? Can backup data be used? I'm assuming this is saying, can backup data be used for disaster recovery?
Good question. So, I get that a lot, right? Disaster recovery versus backup, and a lot of times I encourage people to have both. And the academic answer is yes. Backup data can be used to fuel disaster recovery, but you have to really build that around your SLAs. I like replication engines as well from what Veeam can do. And I'll kind of draw a hint here to the future that we have a capability coming that can use the Veeam cloud tier that we just spoke about. We can actually build that around our orchestration engine. That's a capability that we're going to have here soon. So the thought is the answer gets yes and stronger with that. So the short answer is we have to look at what the expectations are for disaster recovery, but then we also have to flip that around. As if we fail over to something, we have to be able to make sure that is protected because it gets to become production, right? So, thinking about the data flow, how we're going to use it, how we're going to restore, these are all the things that go into the decision. But as a high-level answer, yes, it can be used for disaster recovery.
And I would say that if you dig through the webinar channel here on our Storage Quest webinar channel, I bet you will find a webinar with Rick and I talking specifically about service level agreements, because we're kind of like, we think those are a big deal. So if you want to dive deep on those, just scan the channel. Probably a couple pages back, you'll see a webinar that Rick and I went into some detail on that. Let's see. Amit, how about this one for you? Is Cloudian an appliance, or is it software-defined storage?
Actually, that's a good question. I should have dwelt into that. I have it somewhere on my slide. So the genesis of Cloudian is an SDS. So we are a software-defined storage. We are capable of running on any x86 device there is out there. But over the years, based on customer demands, we also have our own appliance. So we have Hyperstore available as an appliance, which is a completely packaged hardware-software solution that we provide to our customers. In addition, we have strategic alliances with a certain number of hardware vendors, and these range from Cisco, HPE, and Lenovo, where we have custom-tested specific software versions of our Hyperstore that are available on on their devices. And final answer is, in some cases, we are also available to be deployed on a public cloud on an infrastructure as a service model, where Hyperstore can be deployed on the public cloud and to create a multi-cloud kind of use case scenario. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think it does. And just to point out, I also think that your guys' bezels, I don't know if you can see them in the picture, I think your guys' bezels are really cool looking. So I would get the appliance just for the bezel. So that's awesome. Me, though.
I like it.
You'll be happy
green,
to know
I like it.
Yeah, you'll be happy to know we're making it even more greener, and we're making it more shinier. So a new bezel coming out, which enhances that look.
Okay, cool. All right, so the third question I'm going to take, and I'm going to throw it to you guys to see if you have some input. I just thought it was interesting. Any advice on how to decide if I should use public cloud or object storage? The way it comes down to me is, the one thing I always caution people, because what I hear people say a lot is, well, I'm going to start with public cloud, and then I'll switch to object storage when I get big. That seems like a very, very rational path. The problem is that when you hit that point and you're big, then that egress charge becomes a really big deal. So what I advise people is, if you see a point where you are going to get big, man, just be real careful how you think about that. And I think that object storage, especially today, can be purchased in a way that the model can be kind of similar to how you buy cloud storage anyway. So I think that you just got to be careful with that. I think and I'm not saying there's not any use case for the cloud itself. I like cloud more from a compute aspect than I do storage. But I think that, like anything else, everybody has different tools and different priorities, and you just got to pick between those. Guys, any comments on that?
I can add a little more to that, right? Just on the consumption model that you talked about, the way object storages have traditionally been consumed is you just have a hardware device that gets installed. At Cloudian, what we're doing is we're also trying to offer the flexibility of the cloud consumption model to our customers. So we've recently launched, I think it was earlier this year itself, a consumption model for Hyperstore. Now, what this is kind of a model where customers pay as you go and can use the expenses for Cloudian as an OPEX as compared to a CAPEX. This is not the leasing model, because leasing cannot be considered an OPEX. It's a specific tool to just go to what you just mentioned, where customers can actually dabble in object storage and start small, grow as you need, get all of the flexibility that you get with the cloud. But as you grow, you have that capability of growing without the egress charges that are required.
Great. Rick, any comments?
No, I think the one piece of sage advice is don't start and change. One thing I learned a long time ago is not to change horses in the middle of the river, right? So when you think about, if I'm going to start a backup infrastructure and a backup storage and change over this later, I don't know, that doesn't smell right. So, kind of take a model that cloud storage gives you. And cloud is a model. It's not a location. It doesn't necessarily mean it's off-site and it's hyperscale. It's a model of consumption, elasticity, abstraction, et cetera. Make that decision and architect around it, and not change horses in the middle of the river, and you'll be in good shape.
Okay, great. So I put the guys. Why don't you guys go ahead and prioritize probably one more question each? We've probably got time for one more. While they're scanning through the questions, I put our contact information on the screen. Many people watch these webinars on demand. We don't want you to feel left out. So feel free to tweet us questions at StorageSwiss, or if you just want to send me a private email, that literally is my email address. If you, just so you know, I don't need any more gold mines in foreign countries. I'm set. I got 5 now, so I'm all good. and so don't need any of that. But if you do have a question about the webinar, feel free to email me or tweet us at StorageSwiss. So let's see. So Amit, let's see. This one would be for you. So we kind of touched on this already, but maybe you can kind of talk about it a little bit more. Is we are considering public cloud storage for our needs. How is Cloudian pricing compared with the public cloud?
Yeah. So that kind of goes into a little more detail, I guess. Cloudian is very comparable to public cloud pricing, and as you scale, it in fact goes slightly lesser than public cloud storage. So we have customers that go as low as half a cent per gigabyte per month on large scale deployments. Now, the consumption model is obviously a very interesting choice for a lot of our customers, and it's a very new model, so that is based on customer to customer and need by need basis. But we have very different flexibilities that we can offer our customers, and as a generality, we are comparable or lower than the public cloud models without the egress charges or the API charges.
Okay, great. Well, we're about out of time, so we're going to end it there. Again, if you asked a question we didn't get to you, we will send you an email with the answer. And if you're watching on demand, feel free to ask us a question at Storage Swiss, and we'll certainly get back to you. For now, though, Rick, thanks very much for joining us on the webinar today.
Cheers. Thanks again, and happy to have told the great cloud tier storage story.
Yeah, absolutely. And Amit, same. Thank you for joining us in the conversation.
Thank you, George, for having me, and thank you, everybody, for listening in. Thanks, Rick, for the great partnership you guys have with us.
All right. Well, and I want to thank all of you for joining us today. If you joined late and you want to listen to the front end of the presentation, again, the URL that brought you here in about 5 minutes will be the on-demand version. For now, though, I'm George Crump, lead analyst with Storage Switzerland. Have a great day.